Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our session 4 of our Region 4 KEA Implementation Go-To meetings. This is Lauren Austin, and sitting with me today is Jamie Graham, and Steve Lear is online with us. And Jamie is going to be manning the chat box today. And so if you have any questions or comments or concerns during this session, please type in the chat box any of those things and she will respond as soon as she can. She's enjoying it, I think. And as you see on the screen, if we saw that Whiteville City's here and Bladen County and Lee County, if there's anybody that has not submitted their district name, if you will do that just so we know who's in attendance with us today, that would be fantastic. So today, May the 6th, we are going to focus on the cognitive development domain, specifically the object counting progression, and we are going to go through the steps. So again, just to remind you, these meetings are being recorded and they will be sent out to your district leads after each session so that they can be played back at your convenience. For today's meeting, our key point is evidence is used to guide instruction. So teachers use a variety of data to better understand what their students know and what they are able to do. When the evidence is generated, the teacher interprets the evidence and locates the student's current learning status along the construct progression. This allows the teacher to adapt and respond to the learning needs of the student, adjusting learning targets as appropriate. So today we're going to take a closer look at the object counting construct progression so that you have a clear understanding of what each step and skill look like so that you can use this progression as a tool to help you gather evidence on where your students are developmentally in counting objects. Hopefully you will see that by using this progression as a means to better understanding your students' learning, you will not view it as another thing that you have to do, but instead it'll be a support for helping you achieve success in the things that you are already teaching. Because this may help you identify where some of the gaps in your students' learning are coming from, and maybe by closing those gaps, your students will be able to master the standards that are a part of your kindergarten curriculum. So again, just real quick, we want to run through the formative assessment definition and previously introduced the definition of formative assessment, and the bold words are key. The formative assessment process is not a stop teaching to test process. Instead, it is a process that teachers and students use together to inform instruction immediately. And this process occurs during teachable moments and during the instruction. And we just thought the clip art was cute for all you chefs out there. So, what is a construct progression? Well, a construct progression have been developed to support each of the formative assessment critical components. A construct progression is a carefully sequenced set of understandings and skills for a particular concept or subject matter, which moves from a less sophisticated state to a more refined state. By describing a developmental pathway of learning, construct progressions can provide clarity for teachers by clearly articulating the skills that progress for a particular concept. Thus, construct progressions are a powerful tool. When teachers understand the continuum of learning in a domain and have information about a current status relative to learning goals, they are better able to make decisions about what the next steps in learning should be. So, what does this look like? Construct progressions have been developed in each of the 5 domains of development and learning, and they provide teachers the big picture of what students need to learn and sufficient details for planning instruction to meet short-term goals. Construct progressions, again, are comprised of 3 parts, and we went through these last week. First are understandings, 2 skills, and 3 performance descriptors. Understandings identify the major concepts within a particular topic. The skills identify the competencies within each understanding, ranging from simple to more complex levels. The performance descriptors paint a picture of what a child may say, do, make, or write to demonstrate his or her understanding or skill at each stage of the progression. The performance descriptors help teachers make inferences from evidences gathered to identify where a learner's learning status is along the progression and to identify where the students likely need to move next along the continuum of learning and development. When used within a formative assessment process, construct progressions help teachers connect formative assessment opportunities to the short-term goals to keep track of how well their students' learning is moving forward. The marriage of construct progressions and high-quality formative assessment strategies answer the following key questions to guide instructor feedback. Where am I going? What are the goals? How am I doing? What progress is being made toward the goal? Where to next? What activities need to be undertaken to make better progress? The better teachers become at managing these 3 questions, the stronger the formative process will become, and their instructional benefits will take hold. So, there's a construct progression for each of the 8 constructs. And a construct progression is carefully a sequence set of understandings and skills for a particular concept or subject matter that traces the development of learning over time from a rudimentary form to a more sophisticated state. Construct progressions are not standards. They are not pacing guides. They are not a curriculum scope and sequence. Rather, construct progressions lay out increasingly more complex understandings of core concepts, principles, or skill development, providing a picture of what it means to develop in an area of learning. The construct progressions will help you identify learning goals to answer where is your learner going and provide an interpretive framework to make inferences from evidence gathered to identify where the learner is now and to point the way to what the student needs next. The progressions are aligned to the North Carolina Standards for Early Learning and Development and the North Carolina Standard Course of Study. So now that we have reviewed how the progression is set up, let's dive into today's progression that is part of the cognitive domain. Remembering that the cognitive domain had claims, and they were that students can use content-independent abilities and strategies, as well as content-specific skills, processes, and approaches to solve problems and acquire information. Students can make connections to prior learning, construct knowledge, and demonstrate their understanding using multiple modes of expression. And also that students can come to understand themselves as learners and acquire dispositions, attitudes, beliefs, and values that support their academic engagement. So, object counting is the ability to understand number names, the counting sequence, and that counting tells the number of objects. They are essential understandings needed for the early developmental years. Understanding counting is more than being able to count to 100. And in bold, we see that counting is a complex concept. And we also need to develop foundational concepts such as knowledge of numbers in order to build future math and reading skills. And children move through progressive mathematical stages in order to understand that quantities remain the same when they are rearranged, and they learn to be consistent and accurate and to see relationships between numbers. So, your turn. So, we know that a lot of you are in groups today, and in your groups, if you will take a minute or two to talk or jot down some examples of how you have taught or how you have maybe even observed students counting to tell the number of objects in your classroom, and if you will submit an example of that in the chat box. So, we're just going to give you a second to work, okay? Thank you for being such active participants in replying in the chat box. It's really helped us to really think about what you do every day to support this process of developmental change over time. And the examples that you've provided are absolutely right on point. Many of them are relevant to specific math concepts that are taught during a math lesson.
maybe the use of these counting of objects in a math station. And then some of you even mentioned some things that are relevant to just day-to-day activities that occur within the course of business as usual in your kindergarten classroom. And we just want to thank you for providing these opportunities to think about all of the multiple chances that you have as a teacher to carefully observe students as they have an opportunity to count objects to see where they fall on the developmental continuums.
So, in thinking about some of the things that you were already doing, and a lot of the things that you entered in, Jamie and I were talking through the break about the I can't even say the word, about how they were authentic and they were things that you were just naturally doing. But we also want to remind you that you are also doing the standards, and you have probably thought of many times that you have taught object counting specifically in regards to the standards also. But again, you proved to us that there are also many times that you can see object counting happening outside of your math lesson. And so we just wanted to throw these standards up on the screen just to show the relation that they have to this progression. So for the object counting construct, we want to begin with the understanding. And the understanding is that children recognize that counting tells the number of objects. And we want to remember that this is the major concept that children should obtain, and that the skills we are about to review are the progressive steps in helping to teach this concept. So we're going to start with A, and if you notice, this progression goes from A through H. So in skill A, they say or indicate counting words randomly with one number for each object while tapping or pointing to one and only one object to attempt to determine the number of objects in a collection. And the performance descriptor is to provide an example of what this skill may look like. And in this example, Liam is counting his 3 crayons before he begins his art project. He touches each crayon as he says the number words out loud. 1, 3, 6. So notice that I've highlighted the word randomly. And also you see that in the skill, the student needs to be using the one-to-one correspondence. And so really we see that they are demonstrating counting behaviors and using one-to-one correspondence, but they are not necessarily successful. And we see in the example where he was 1, 3, 6. So just real quick, the one-to-one correspondence, I just want to take a minute to show that this crosses subjects, and this is a skill that you can observe and teach in numerous settings outside your math. And in the picture, you see that they're using the one-to-one correspondence for reading a sentence. And so, again, I highlighted in A where that is part of your standard. One and only one number name, and each number name with one and only one object. So going to skill B. The student says or indicates counting words sequentially, saying one number for each object while tapping or pointing to one and only one object to attempt to determine the number of objects in a collection without keeping track of objects counted. And an example of skill B, and we actually have 3 examples of skill B, so I'm going to go through all 3 of them since there are multiple ways you could observe this. The first being there are 7 chrysalises hanging from branches placed in the butterfly pavilion. Isabella is looking at the butterfly pavilion, and the teacher asks, how many chrysalises are in the branches? As Isabella points to some chrysalises, she says, 1, 2, 3, 4. The teacher asks, did you count all of them? And Isabella says, yes. The second example. Tamika begins exploring the acorns at the Science Center. She lines them up, touches each one, and says, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. James asks Tamika, how many acorns are there? Tamika touches each acorn and says, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And the third example, Davis takes a scoop of animal crackers and places them on the napkin. He touches each animal cracker while saying one number word in order for each cracker, not keeping track of where he started counting. Davis returns to already counted animal crackers and recounts 3 of the crackers. So, how does B progress from A? Well, now the students have gone from counting randomly to counting in the correct sequence. They are still using the one-to-one correspondence. However, they are not keeping track of the objects that they are counting, which, as we all know, and as Davis did in the third example, can lead to mistakes. Skill C is students keeps track of objects when counting, not counting them twice or missing any. And an example of this is Miss Martinez wants to make sure that each team has 8 bean bags. I said miss, I meant mister. He drops a handful of bean bags in the middle of each squad. Mr. Martinez says, Olivia, please count the number of bean bags for your squad. Olivia moves the beanbag at a time and says, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, without counting any of them twice or missing any. So in Skill C, the student has progressed by adding on to the earlier skills, such as using the one-to-one correspondence again and counting in the correct sequential order. And this time we have added, though, that they are using some method of keeping track of the objects that they have counted to ensure that they are not missing any or recounting any. So, keeping track. Well, as you know, because you do this in your classroom all the time, there's so many ways that students can keep track. And when you look at the slide, this is just a few examples of different ways that students move manipulatives or push things to the side in order to keep track. And I'm sure as you're looking at this, one of these pictures looks out of place. And hopefully it is the jar of marbles that the little redheaded boy is counting, because clearly there is no way he could keep track of counting, which makes keeping track a more progressive skill. So moving on, skill D. The student states or indicates that the last number counted is the total quantity. So cardinality. And an example of this is Mr. Martinez wants to make sure that each team has 8 bean bags. He drops a handful of bean bags in the middle of each squad. Mr. Martinez says, Olivia, please count the number of bean bags for your squad. And Olivia moves one bean bag at a time and says, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, without counting any of them twice or missing any. Mr. Martinez then asks Olivia, how many bean bags do you have for your squad? And Olivia says 8. So this skill may or may not require teacher probing. There may be situations where students call out the total after counting a set of objects on their own, or maybe they write it down on a piece of paper or on a worksheet that they're doing. Or maybe, as in this example, the teacher has to intervene and ask, so how many do you have? So looking at cardinality, we wanted to tie it back to the standards that you are already teaching. And in B, there it is. Understand that the last number name said tells the number of objects counted. So, as kindergarten teachers, you are probably very familiar with this skill level because you teach this every year. And this actually may be a great starting point for you since you are familiar with this step and since it's in the standard course of study. And you may be able to see if students are past this skill or before this skill. Moving along to skill E, and students state or indicate the same quantity without recounting, or they state or indicate that repeated counting yields the same number and recognizes the need to check by recounting if counting the same objects twice has yielded different answers. So I have several examples of what E looks like, since there were several ways to observe E. The first being, at the Art Center, Patrick counts out 7 markers. Miss Sims asked Patrick, "How many markers did you count?" And without recounting the markers, Patrick says 7. A second example would be at the Art Center, Patrick selects 7 markers from the marker container and counts them. Miss Sims asks Patrick, "How many markers did you count?" And Patrick says 7, see? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and he touches the markers as he counts. And another example would be that at the Art Center, Patrick selects 7 markers from the marker container and counts them. Miss Sims asks Patrick, "How many markers did you count?" Patrick says 7, see? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And he touches the markers as he counts, counting one of the markers twice. Recognizing that the number he counted was different than the number he told Miss Sims, Patrick recounts the markers. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. That's right, 7. So the major difference between skill D and skill E is that a student does not have to recount to display cardinality, or that they have a clear understanding that recounting will yield the same total quantity. Also in skill E, you may notice that a student realizes, like Patrick did in the last one, that when he recounted and got a different total quantity from the first time, that the counting was incorrect one of the times, and he realizes that he needs to recount to make sure he has the same quantity twice. In skill F, the student names or indicates the same number for rearranged objects without recounting, and they explain or indicate that counting twice yields the same quantity, which is conservation. And an example of this is, during snack time, Chandler takes a scoop of animal crackers, counts them, and places them on his plate. Miguel, the boy next to Chandler, asks, "How many crackers are on your plate?" And Chandler answers, 8. Miguel then accidentally turns over Chandler's plate, and the animal crackers are arranged differently on the table. Miguel says, "You've got a lot of crackers. How many do you have now?" And Chandler says, 8. So in skill F, objects are rearranged, and the rearrangement serves to see if they still have conservation. And the student knows that counting twice will not change the total quantity, just like Chandler said to Miguel. So again, to point out that this is already in your standards, and B also was the second part of B, that the number of objects is same regardless of their arrangement or the order in which they were counted. So moving forward to skill G, the student continues the counting sequence when one object is added to the set without counting all of them again. And an example, and I think I have 2 for skill G, is the first one. Brittany and Mario have jobs as cashiers in their class market. Brittany accurately counts the pennies in the cash register and tells Mario, "We have 12 pennies." Mario sees an extra penny on the floor, picks it up, hands it to Brittany, and says, "Now we have 13 pennies." And another example of G is the teacher holds up the compliment jar filled with cubes, 1 cube for every compliment the class receives. She reminds the class that yesterday they counted 8 cubes in the jar. She then holds up one more cube and asks, "If I take one more cube for the compliment we just received and put that cube in the jar, how many cubes would there be?" The children hold up their fingers, indicating the amount they think are in the jar. Maria, Juanita, and Chloe quickly hold up 9 fingers. The teacher asks Chloe, "How many cubes do you think are in the jar?" Chloe says 9, see? And Chloe holds a cupped hand to indicate the cubes in the jar and says 8. She then mimics putting another cube in the cupped hand and says 9. So in Skill G, students are advancing their skill set by being able to add an object to a set without having to go back and recount. And in Skill H, our last skill, students continue the counting sequence when more than one object is added to the set without again counting all of them. And an example of this is Sarah and Zola are playing a +2 counting game. Sarah rolls the blue die and counts out 8 chips and places them on the game board. Zola then rolls the red die, picks up 2 more chips, and places them with the others on the game board and says 10. So lastly, in Skill H, a student is able to continue counting a sequence when more than one object is added to the set without recounting. So in a quick recap, we see all the skills together here in this slide to give you a glance at how each skill is progressive and builds upon one another to ensure the overarching understanding that children recognize that counting tells the number of objects. So I'm going to pause here for a moment and give everybody a minute to talk amongst themselves while this screen is up so that you have a minute to kind of digest all those skills that we just ran through so quickly. And if anybody wants to type anything, any questions or comments about these in the chat box, we're just going to give everybody about 2 minutes to convene.
Okay, so if we can pull back together for a moment, we've given you some time to look at this slide from A to H in relationship to Lauren's very well detailed examples that she provided. And just wanted to reiterate that in many of our meetings, we've had the conversation about these developmental continuums ranging for kindergarten entry assessment from roughly around typically developing students around age 3 to somewhere around age 5 or 6, which would generally be in the age 5, 6 range, your kindergarten students. And so if you look at this at a glance slide, you will notice that somewhere around F, G, and H within that range would be the relationship with development and the content that students would be exposed to in your kindergarten classrooms that you would want your children to be able to show that they have that skill set or that understanding in order for them to be somewhat successful, or with the right scaffolding and support, develop that skill set so that they can become proficient and successful at kindergarten curriculum standards. So we just wanted to re-emphasize that one more time, because all of the construct progressions that have been written for the purpose of the North Carolina Kindergarten Entry Assessment range from typically developing 3 years old to somewhere around 5 or 6 years old. Knowing that children are going to come in to your kindergarten classroom with a wide range of skill sets, and you as that classroom teacher being the variable, the hard work that you put in every day, you will begin to see children progress through these skills, and you can be very thankful and very reflective to know that you were able to help them grow in their developmental understandings to help them become more successful in school and life.
So now that you have had a minute to think about all that, what are you going to do with these skills? And we just kind of wanted to take a minute and go there, because once you establish where a student is on the scale, what does that mean? What do you do? So as the evidence is interpreted, the teacher, you use that evidence to locate the student's current learning status along a construct progression. And this status represents a point that describes their current skills and abilities based on the evidence that you have gathered. So, identifying a learning status, it is important to remember that the process of identifying a child's learning status is not an exact science, and that it is your best interpretation at one point in time based on the current evidence collected. So, which makes it again a formative process, that you are taking what you see at that moment and trying to understand that student's learning. And that can be done in the moment. And as you see on this slide, it shows the circle where you're interacting with a child during the learning experience. Then you learn what the student understands and the skills possessed, and you go forth. So the process of interpreting the evidence and adapting and responding to learning with the formative assessment process, this can be immediately during the instructional moment. So, for example, as you are interacting with a student during instruction, you may learn what the student understands and the skills that he or she possesses. And you can quickly interpret this information, keeping the progression and the skills in mind, and respond in that moment by adapting or adjusting the instruction accordingly through scaffolding, instructing, questioning, probing, descriptive feedback. And you may have that evidence for documentation later or record keeping. This can also be done after the moment, And so, in other times, your interpretation of evidence collected and the response to your student's need, they may occur after the learning experience has taken place. So, after you elicit evidence of learning through observation or work samples or conversations, you consider and interpret the evidence using the construct progression to help identify the current learning status. And then, based on that, you plan for your next instructional steps that occur in the near immediate time frame. So, some additional discoveries that you may get from the evidence that you collect. So, as you're interpreting the evidence, you may additionally discover beyond specific information about a child, and you may discover gaps in his or her understanding of what a child knows and realizes that they need more information. For example, the teacher has several pieces of documentation that illustrate a student's ability to count a collection of up to 10 objects with cardinality. However, all of the evidence collected occurs when the objects were arranged in a straight line. And so you, as the teacher, wonder, what is the student able to do when the objects are arranged randomly or in a circle or in a scattered arrangement? You may also discover patterns in the data that inform your classroom structure. For example, with book and print awareness, the teacher has several pieces of documentation that illustrate that children may rarely read books outside of a structured time. So, thus, the teacher doesn't have a variety of data about book orientation and print awareness, but by providing opportunities for children to select books independently, you could create opportunities for observing book orientation and print awareness concepts. And then lastly, you may identify areas for further attention. So if approximately 2/3 of the students have a similar misconception, some new or varied learning experiences are likely needed to teach the particular concept in a different way. So, how do you include this progression into your teaching and into your classroom? And there are actually several ways that you can do that. And again, we do not intend for the progressions to be like the standards that you are required to teach. Instead, they are to be infused into what you are already doing in your kindergarten classroom. And I know we say that so many times. So, we just wanted to go through a couple of ways to show you how you can integrate them into what you already do. You can be a careful observer. You might intentionally plan. You may use the situations or a task. So, for a careful observer, so hopefully after today, you have a deeper understanding of how the progression unfolds. And with that knowledge, that makes you prepared for what we call being a careful observer. And so throughout the day, the teacher facilitates learning experiences. While children are working on assigned activities by the teacher or self selected activities chosen by the students, you are able to learn about them by what they make, do, say, or write. Therefore, you can learn about your students by just observing, by asking probing questions, listening to what they're saying, looking at their work. And this occurs as you are teaching and as the student is learning. You may also do some intentional planning. So, using your own lesson plan. So, intentionally planning is taking what you are already teaching and marking places in the lesson where you can observe certain skills. And this is intentional because it's part of the pre planning that you have to do so that you know ahead of the moments where skills may be best observed or which students you should focus on this day. So, for example, if you were teaching a lesson on cardinality and you knew that Jamie and Lauren were very weak in that area, or you just really weren't that sure, you may make a point during the student work time to walk over to Jamie and Lauren and get a deeper understanding of where they are. There are also general situations, and a general situation can be done in any setting with any number or grouping of students. So just by watching your students explore various math manipulatives or interacting with a variety of objects throughout the day, and a lot of the examples you put in the chat box remind me of the general situation. Is you taking the opportunity to witness children counting and taking the opportunities to learn where they are on the continuum, and remembering that you can initiate a counting experience for a child if you see fit, or you can probe them to see if they have a true understanding or to see if they have a deeper knowledge of that skill. And the general situations, and I'm going to take you there in a minute to the live binder so that you can see where these are housed so that you can go to them or print them for your convenience. And there are specific situations. And a specific situation is different from a general situation in the fact that you are focusing on a smaller group of students. Maybe you've just not been able to see through the other avenues where exactly students are on the progression, or maybe you find yourself unsure based on what you have observed of where a student is. You may want to refer to a specific situation, and up above on the screen, how many are here today, grab a handful, and just one more are 3 situations that are also on the live binder that I'm going to take you to. And these may provide you with a more focused approach to understanding students' skill levels. So we're going to go to the live binder and show you where you can find that information. So on the live binder, you see the green tabs, and it is the green tab titled Construct Progressions beside Engaging Families. If you click on that tab and you scroll down, you see the North Carolina Construct Progression and Situation book, and you can click on that little roll bar on the side, and that'll take you, and that has all the domains and the construct progressions, and it has the general for object counting and the 3 specifics, as well as the progression itself with the performance descriptors. So that would be a great resource for you to have, and it is there. So going back to our PowerPoint, in summary, a construct progression is a carefully sequenced set of understandings and skills for a particular concept. And the developmental sequence within a construct progression moves from a less sophisticated state to a more refined state, as we saw. And lastly, that as the evidence is interpreted, the teacher uncovers what a student knows and is able to do. The teacher uses these construct progressions to identify the current learning status on the progression and pinpoint the next learning target. And instruction is then tailored to the student's needs. So remembering that the process of interpreting evidence and adapting and responding to learning can also occur immediately during the instructional moment, or it can occur after the moment. So again, that's our contact information if you need to get in touch with us or get any more information. We're going to take a second, and Jamie, I'm going to ask Jamie if she has anything she wants to share. And if you have anything to share, we would like to take the last 5 minutes and use the chat box to have some conversation.
Thank you, Lauren. I think that this has been a very beneficial review process in many ways of the object counting progression. And ultimately, what we really hope that teachers gain from this today is to know where their resources are and to take this opportunity today from this point forward in preparation for the work that you will be doing in your classroom in the upcoming school year, to become familiar with it, to practice a little bit with it, to gain some information from your colleagues by providing opportunities to collaborate and ask questions of one another and do some problem solving and thinking about how this might look in the first few days of school, and think about how this might look when you're planning for future instruction. Think about what this might look like for children who come into kindergarten who may be at the farthest end of the progression. What might be the process the teachers take with that group of children, and then what might it look like for those children who we can identify some learning needs and some possible needs for scaffolding and support, and how can you as teachers help one another to grow and learn from utilizing this object counting progression, but then also thinking about the structure of that, knowing that in the following year there will be 8 developmental progressions that teachers will be utilizing in their classroom in a very embedded way to support what they do for children on a daily basis. And we just again want to thank you for your hard work. We know that it's not an easy job that you do every day, and the fact that you are willing to come together as a group of teachers to learn and grow and prepare yourself in a very proactive way so that you can do what's best for your children is just to be commended. And we cannot thank you enough for joining us. I know this has been something that has been put before us as a need, and this has been very enjoyable for us, and we hope that it has for you. Please know that we are here, and we will give you the next few minutes. If you have any questions that we can help you with, we are more than glad to do so. And also know that your district leaders are growing in this process as well, and we're supporting them. Thank them. They are fantastic. They have really put forth an effort to put this information in your hands. So I'm just going to pause for a moment and see if we have any questions. We see a question maybe of whether or not tomorrow will be same time, same place, and absolutely we look forward to that. We will be digging a little bit deeper into an activity and questions and answers then as well. And before you go, I just want to reach out and say thank you to Steve, who is also on the call today. Steve has been out diligently working with district leaders and district teams. And for those of you who may serve in that capacity, know that that he is also available to help support and think about your plan for implementation. And he's a phone call, conversation, email away. So just know that he's available as well. And we just want to do what we can to serve you. See and thank you. So I hope that that was beneficial, and I hope that we will see some familiar names tomorrow as we move into a little bit deeper understanding of this construct progression. And if there are no other questions or final comments that we see in the chat bar, we want to be mindful of your time. So we appreciate you, and happy teaching tomorrow with your kindergartners.